19 seconds, that's all it took for Jasmine Crockett to turn a quiet Senate hearing into political chaos. Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade, as she accused Donald Trump of handpicking a man who stood outside the Capitol during the January 6th riot to control America's most trusted economic numbers. Senators froze, cameras zoomed in, and the nation held its breath. What happens when the truth itself is put on trial in front of the entire country, and the whole world is watching? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber was already electric before a single word was spoken. C-SPAN's cameras swept the room in slow, deliberate arcs, catching the razor-sharp eyes of every network. CNN's producers barking in hushed urgency, MSNBC's political analysts whispering predictions, Fox News anchor leaning forward like a hunter scenting blood. In the press gallery, New York Times and Washington Post reporters gripped their pens so tight the plastic creaked. You could hear the nervous staccato of camera shutters, the shallow breaths of aides pressed against the walls, and underneath it all, the low, ominous hum of the air vents, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Then the double doors groaned open. Jasmine Crockett emerged, not walking, but advancing, each heel strike on the marble floor like the tick of a bomb counting down. Her gaze never wavered, scanning the room as though marking targets, until it locked on the man at the witness table. Donald Trump sat there, relaxed in posture, a heart in the eyes, the corners of his mouth curled into a smirk that radiated defiance. His cufflinks winked in the overhead light, a flash of gold against the storm gathering in the room. The gavel slammed once, a sharp crack that made heads jerk. Silence fell, not polite, but loaded, dangerous, the kind of silence that comes before a shot is fired. Crockett lowered herself into her seat with the pose of a fighter stepping into the ring, binder resting lightly in her hands, yet heavy with the weight of what was inside. Trump leaned back, fingers steepled, as though daring her to draw first blood. They didn't just exchange glances, they traded unspoken threats, the air between them tightening like a pulled wire. This wasn't politics as usual. This was about whether the nation's truth would survive what was about to unfold. Somewhere, a producer whispered into a hot mic, "We've got it. This is the moment," and across millions of living rooms, viewers leaned forward, sensing they were seconds away from watching the truth either ignite or burn to ash. What would she unleash first, and would he survive it? E.J. Antoni's name wasn't new to the political insiders in that room, but the reason for today's hearing was like a live grenade rolled onto the Senate floor. He was Trump's handpicked, chose to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the agency, a controlled economic pulse of the nation, yet the air was thick with the unspoken fact that his face had been caught in footage from January 6th, not inside the Capitol, no, but in the bowling chaos outside, the air rippling with tear gas, Alex Jones barking through a megaphone, protesters clinging to scaffolding as police in riot gear braced for the surge. And now, here was Antoni, one Senate vote away from becoming the man who could decide how every American job, wage, and cost of living number would be reported or hidden. The White House had tried to wrap it in a clean narrative, just a bystander. That phrase had been repeated so many times it felt manufactured, polished for press releases, designed to shut down questions before they began. But outside the bubble of talking points, the footage told its own story. Antoni wasn't sipping coffee blocks away, he was in the thick of the crowd when the air turned white with gas and barricades were already gone. In this room, everyone knew that proximity mattered. It wasn't about whether he had stepped inside those walls, it was about the chose to be there at all. The Bureau of Labor Statistics wasn't some obscure government corner, it was the scoreboard for America's economic reality. Every month, its reports could send the stock market soaring or crashing. They could tilt elections, decide whether families felt confident to buy a home, or force small businesses to lay off workers. MCC Hun. If the numbers could be bent, trust in the system would break, and once broken, it would never be whole again. And this was the man Trump wanted holding the pen. For Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't just a policy fight, it was a personal vow. The night before, in a cramped community center in her district, she'd stood in front of her constituents as an older woman in a denim jacket stepped forward. The woman's voice had trembled, but her words had been steel. "If they take the truth from us, they take everything. Promise you'll fight," Jasmine had promised. She'd seen the nods ripple through the crowd, felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders like armor. Now, as she sat in that chamber facing Trump, She wasn't just a congresswoman, she was the voice of people who didn't have the luxury of walking away from the consequences. She glanced once at Antoni, then back to Trump, and in that brief flicker, the room seemed to constrict. There was no exit from what was coming. The question wasn't whether she'd strike, it was how deep she'd be willing to cut, and whether the country would have the stomach to hear the truth bleed out. The chair had barely lowered his gavel before Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her voice slicing through the charged silence like shrapnel. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone steady but laced with heat, "why choose a man tied to the darkest day in modern American democracy to control the nation's numbers?" The words landed heavy, a direct hit that made even the stenographer's fingers hesitate. Cameras locked on Trump's face. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to. A slow exhale, a faint shrug, and then the reply, coded in condescension. "Bystander." That's all he was, just a man walking by. He let the words hang there like a dare. Crockett's jaw tightened, but her eyes sharpened, calculating, predatory. "A man walking by," she repeated, letting the phrase curl in the air like smoke. He was in the crowd when tear gas rolled across the West Front, when scaffolding was shaking with the weight of men climbing toward a breach. That's not a Sunday stroll. That's a front row seat to an attempted overthrow. A low murmur swept the room, and a Fox News camera zoomed so close you could count the gold threads in Trump's tie. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. And yet, Congresswoman, he didn't break a single law, not one. "This witch hunt," she cut him off before he could land the phrase. "It's not a witch hunt when the stakes are this high. You're handing him the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where every number on jobs, wages, and inflation will run through his hands. Numbers that move markets, numbers that decide elections. Numbers that tell the American people whether they can buy groceries next week. What happens when those numbers answer to loyalty instead of truth?" The tension was a living thing now, coiling between them. Trump's lips twitched in what might have been a smile or a snarl. "You think the numbers under your people have been honest? Please, he'll fix it." Crockett didn't blink. "Fix it, or fix us, because the last time you fixed something, Mr. Trump, we got January 6th, gasps rippled along the back row. Even the chair shifted in his seat. For a moment, neither moved, locked in an unspoken promise that this was only the first blow of many. The microphones picked up the sound of someone's pen snapping in the gallery. Crockett leaned back slightly, not to retreat, but to pull the string taut before the next shot. "If the data that shapes your paycheck, your mortgage, your future could be rewritten at will, would you still believe the story it told you?" She let the silence stretch, eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to answer, because the real question wasn't for Trump at all. It was for everyone watching, inside that chamber and far beyond, who thought the truth was still theirs to keep. A staffer in a navy suit wheeled the monitor to the center of the chamber, the screen still black. The click of the remote was sharp enough to slice the air, and then motion. The grainy footage filled the room with chaos. There was E.J. Antoni, his dark overcoat blending into the swarm, face half-lit by the winter sun and the glare of police shields. Tear gas drifted like phantom smoke across the West Front, turning the crowd into shifting silhouettes. From somewhere just off camera, Alex Jones's voice boomed through a megaphone, a distorted sermon of defiance and fury. Behind Antoni, men scaled the metal scaffolding meant for the inauguration, their boots clanging against steel as they climbed toward the unguarded heights. The sound in the room wasn't from the video, it was here, now. The scrape of chairs as senators leaned forward, the wet cough of someone caught off guard, the faint rustle of papers that suddenly mattered a lot less than the image on screen. On the Democratic side, jaws tightened. On the Republican side, eyes narrowed or darted away entirely. A freshman senator froze mid-note, pen suspended in the air. Jasmine Crockett didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked on Trump, unblinking, watching every twitch, every micro-expression. He sat still at first, then leaned back, lips pressing into a thin line, as the footage cut to Antoni moving through the East Front, head swiveling as though taking it all in. The crowd's chants, half celebration, half threat, bled faintly through the chamber speakers. A second clip rolled. Antoni paused at the edge of a barricade, the metal already shoved aside. Behind him, a sea of flags rippled in the winter wind, the nose swelling like an approaching storm. Officers stood in a thin line, visors down, hands gripping batons as the crowd pressed closer. Antoni glanced toward the Capitol dome, its white facade stark against the gray sky, then turned and began to walk away. Gasps broke the spell. One senator muttered something under their breath, another scribbled a note with quick, jagged strokes. But the air was no less charged. Crockett's voice, when it came, was low enough to make people lean in. "Bystander," she said. "I's never leaving Trump's, that's what you call this." Trump shifted, his fingers drumming once against the table before going still. The footage froze on Antoni's face, a half-second before he turned from the scene, a snapshot suspended between action and retreat. Crockett leaned back slightly, the barest smile touching her lips, but it wasn't amusement. It was the look of someone who had just opened the first door in a hallway full of locked secrets. And somewhere beyond these walls, millions watching would feel it too, that this wasn't the whole story, and the part they hadn't seen yet might be worse. Trump leaned toward the microphone, his voice low but edged with the practiced bite of a man who'd survived 1,000 confrontations. "He never went inside," he said, his words clipped, measured, meant to sound reasonable but loaded with accusation. "Stop weaponizing presence. Being somewhere isn't a crime." A few Republican senators nodded, almost on cue, while others kept their expressions neutral, eyes darting toward the cameras as if gauging how the soundbite would play on the evening news. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her binder, knuckles whitening just enough to betray the tension coursing beneath her calm exterior. "Proximity to treason," she said slowly, letting the syllables drop like stones into the silence, "is not a credential. It's a red flag the size of that dome." She gestured toward the Capitol, visible through the tall windows, the same building Antoni had stood outside as history cracked underfoot. A ripple of murmurs rolled through the chamber. The press gallery came alive with the quick staccato of camera shutters. Trump gave a small, dismissive laugh, shaking his head as if she just recited a conspiracy theory. "This is what you do. You take nothing and turn it into theater." His gaze slid to the cameras, then back to Crockett, as if daring her to make it personal. "And she did. Theater." Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "The footage is real. The tear gas was real. The scaffolding and the barricades real. The only performance here is you pretending it doesn't matter." The volume in the room swelled as a handful of senators exchanged heated whispers, and the chair's gavel slammed once, twice, trying to reclaim control. In the gallery, aides were already typing furiously, their screens lighting up with headlines in the making. Outside the chamber, social media was beginning to churn short, shaky clips from reporters' phones hitting Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok in real time. The hashtags #bystander or accomplice and #data trial shot upward in trending lists. Millions were watching not just the hearing but the battle for the narrative as it unfolded. Each new exchange clipped, captioned, and shared before the next blow landed. Trump leaned forward again, voice booming now, almost over the chair's warnings. "You don't get to rewrite reality because it suits your party's agenda. He's qualified, he's smart, and he'll fix the mess your side made." Crockett met him head-on, her voice a clean, unwavering strike. "No, Mr. Trump, you don't get to hand the keys to America's truth to someone who stood in the shadow of an insurrection and call it leadership." For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the microphones. Both of them knew the exchange had just crossed from procedural to historic. And in that charged pause, it was impossible not to wonder, if this was only the second round, how much more explosive could the rest of the fight become? Crockett didn't reach for her binder this time. She didn't need to. The words came hard and precise, as if she'd been holding them in reserve for exactly this moment. "You know, Mr. Trump, this isn't just about January 6th, it's about the man you want to put in charge of the nation's numbers. And it's not just Democrats raising alarms. Conservative economists, people who once defended you, have gone on record calling Antoni unable to grasp basic economics and accusing him of sprinting into the MAGA echo chamber so fast he left competence behind." Her gaze swept across the Republican side of the room, catching the flicker of discomfort in more than one pair of eyes. Trump's smirk twitched, then hardened. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice dropping into that familiar, taunting register. "You're grandstanding for the cameras, Jasmine. You love the spotlight." The line was meant to wound, but it was also a pivot, a way to dodge the substance and drag her into his arena of spectacle. She didn't bite, no, she shot back, each word deliberate. I'm standing for the people who will pay the price for your power games. For the single mother whose paycheck depends on honest labor statistics. For the small business owner who plans hiring based on the truth, not your curated fiction. For every American who will wake up one morning and not recognize the economy because you decided loyalty mattered more than accuracy. Her voice didn't rise, but the steel in it cut through the air sharper than any shout could. Trump tried to interject, but she pressed on, closing the space between them without leaving her chair. And here's the part you can't spin. When your own allies, the people who share your politics, look at your nominee and say he's not qualified, that's not partisan theater. That's the alarm bell you're ignoring because it doesn't flatter you. The press gallery came alive again, pens scratching, cameras tightening their focus on the sharp lines of their faces, to combatants locked in a duel that had gone beyond policy into something personal. The chair's gavel came down once, more out of ritual than hope of control, as the temperature in the room continued to climb. On the line, the clips were already multiplying. Crockett's quote about curated fiction looping over footage of Trump narrowing his eyes, the split screen an instant meme factory. Senators whispered in low, urgent tones, some avoiding the gaze of the cameras entirely. Crockett finally leaned back, her binder still untouched, her eyes never leaving Trump's. You can call it grandstanding if it helps you sleep. Mr. Trump, she said, voice low enough that the microphone seemed to lean toward her, but when your devotion to power blinds you to the damage you're doing, there's only one question left to ask. She let the pause stretch, the silence pull tight around every ear in the room. When does loyalty become complicity? Crockett didn't waste a second. She reached for the remote, and the large monitor beside the witness table lit up, not with January 6 footage this time, but with a stark headline in bold rate: E.J. Antoni calls for suspension of monthly jobs reports. Gasps and murmurs cut through the chamber. She let the words hang there for a beat, then turned back to Trump. Your nominee, she said, has publicly argued that we should stop telling the American people every single month what's happening in their own economy. No job numbers, no unemployment updates, no wage growth data, silence. Her voice sharpened as she stepped into the explanation, speaking not like a politician, but like someone explaining the rules of survival. These reports aren't just some spreadsheet that sits on a desk. They are the compass for American workers, the signal investors read before deciding whether to buy or sell, the map small business owners use to plan hiring and payroll. When you take the compass away even for a few months, you don't just blind the public. You create a void. And do you know what fills that void? Spin, propaganda, manipulation. She clicked again, and a chart appeared, the colors sharp against the screen. A clear example showing how a 3-month delay in jobs data could completely distort the public's perception of whether the economy was growing or shrinking. A red line plunged down sharply, then leveled off, but without the monthly updates, the public wouldn't see the rebound until long after it happened. This, Crockett said, pointing to the gap, is how you control a narrative without ever telling a direct lie. You simply withhold the truth until it no longer matters. Trump shifted in his seat, but she didn't give him room to interrupt. Imagine this: millions of Americans believing the job market is collapsing because they haven't seen the real numbers, pulling back on spending, skipping mortgage payments, canceling plans to expand their business. All because the truth was delayed just long enough to serve someone's political timing. That's not economics, that's sabotage. Her words rolled over the room like slow thunder, forcing even those who disagreed with her politics to follow the logic. When people can't trust the scoreboard, she continued, they stop believing in the game. And when they stop believing in the game, the system itself starts to break. This is not a theoretical risk, it's a roadmap we've seen in countries where the economy becomes a tool of political control. We are not supposed to be one of those countries. She let the screen go dark, the after-image of the chart still burning in the eyes of everyone watching. So, Mr. Trump, when your nominee calls for suspending the single most transparent measure of our economy, I don't see a policy choice, I see a plan. A plan to keep the public in the dark until you can decide what story they're allowed to hear. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping into something colder, heavier. And the real question is, if you could dim the lights on 330 million people at once, would you ever turn them back on? Trump leaned forward, voice rising with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how his words would play on friendly networks. The monthly jobs reports you're defending are nothing but Biden-friendly lies, he said. jabbing a finger toward the chart that had just been on the screen. Numbers cooked to make the economy look better than it is. Everyone knows it. Everyone sees it. The words rolled out like a rally chant, sharp and rehearsed, designed to stick in headlines by nightfall. A few Republican senators nodded, one even smirked. Crockett didn't move right away. She let the claim hang, allowed the echo of it to settle into the walls before she cut it apart. Mr. Trump, let me tell you exactly what happens when leaders start labeling inconvenient facts as lies, she said, her tone calm but underpinned with steel. It's not new. We've seen it in places where the scoreboard only shows numbers that keep the ruler in power, where inflation magically disappears on paper, unemployment is solved overnight, and every official chart is a love letter to the regime. Those places don't have economic stability, they have fear, because no one can trust what they see. She leaned slightly toward the mic, voice lowering as if speaking directly to the millions watching at home. In an authoritarian system, you don't just lose your freedoms, you lose the truth. And when you lose the truth, you can't plan, you can't protect your family, you can't make decisions for your business or your future. You are dependent on what the powerful choose to tell you, and nothing more. The camera feed split briefly, half the screen stayed locked on Crockett's face, the other showing living rooms across America. A man in Ohio, still in his work uniform, shook his head slowly at the TV. A woman in Arizona typed furiously into her phone, live tweeting disbelief. If we can't trust the jobs report, what's next? Weather forecasts, election results. On TikTok, a clip of Trump saying Biden-friendly lies was already looping, layered over footage of empty grocery store shelves from years past, designed to provoke outrage. Back in the chamber, Trump tried to interrupt, but Crockett pushed forward, her voice gaining momentum. It starts with dismissing the numbers, then comes replacing the people who produce them. Before long, the only figures you'll see are the ones that pass the loyalty test. That's not accountability, that's control. And the economy becomes a stage play, where the script is written for one man's benefit and the rest of the country is just an audience, clapping on cue. The words hit with a weight that momentarily stilled even the shuffling in the gallery. She straightened in her chair, her eyes locked on Trump's. So no, Mr. Trump, this isn't about defending one president's numbers over another's, it's about defending the very idea that our economy belongs to the people, not the politicians. And you have to ask yourself if the truth has to be silenced for you to win. What exactly is it you think you're winning? Crockett's patience finally snapped. She leaned in, her voice low but loaded, the kind of tone that made everyone instinctively hold their breath. What you're doing, Mr. Trump, is trying to blindfold America. You want to cover this nation's eyes so you can rewrite what it sees. Suspend the reports, replace the people, control the narrative, and suddenly, the public only knows what you allow them to know. Her words didn't rise in volume, but the sharpness in them cut deeper than any shout. Cameras zoomed tighter on her face, catching the flare in her eyes, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Trump tilted his head, a slow shake like he was amused, but his reply came back like a jab meant to bruise. No, Congresswoman, I'm trying to uncover the truth you and your friends are desperate to hide. You hate the truth, especially when it doesn't fit your politics. He jabbed a finger toward her across the witness table, the movement aggressive enough to draw murmurs from the gallery. The chair's gavel slammed once for order, but neither of them broke eye contact. The tension between them had shifted. It was no longer just a clash over numbers, it was a public challenge over who got to define reality. Crockett didn't blink. I don't hate the truth, Mr. Trump. I fear what happens when it becomes negotiable, when it's filtered, redacted, and served up to suit whoever happens to be in power that week. That's not transparency. That's a hostage situation where the ransom is public trust. Her voice sharpened, each word delivered with the precision of a knife point. She didn't turn to the other senators, she spoke straight to him, and through him to every viewer watching on a screen. Trump leaned forward, resting both hands on the table, his voice rising enough to make the microphone hiss. Public trust, this country hasn't trusted your side for years. You've weaponized every statistic to protect Biden, and now you're panicking because I'm putting someone in who will finally tell the truth. The last word came out like a hammer blow. Several Republican senators shifted in their seats, half smiling, half uneasy, knowing the exchange was already trending online. Crockett let the moment breathe just long enough for the room to lean toward her next move. Then she straightened, Her hands clasped on the table, her voice calm again but with an undertone that carried more danger than any shouted threat. "The truth doesn't need your permission, Mr. Trump, but it will vanish the moment you start putting a price tag on it." She paused, letting the silence settle like dust after an explosion, scanning the room slowly, making sure no one escaped the weight of her next words. "And if truth becomes negotiable, who decides its price?" The chair announced the next witness, and the chamber doors opened again. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strode in. Her signature red lipstick had a deliberate slash of defiance against the muted tones of the room. The click of her heels echoed as she crossed to the witness table, the tension from the Crockett-Trump exchange still vibrating in the air. AOC's eyes swept the senators before settling briefly on Jasmine Crockett, a silent exchange. An unspoken "I'm here, I've got your back." She adjusted the microphone and began without hesitation. "The Bureau of Labor Statistics is supposed to be an anchor for the American people," she said, her tone controlled but underpinned with fire. "When that anchor is cut loose and tied instead to a political ship, you don't just lose numbers, you lose truth, stability, and the ability for everyday Americans to plan their lives. That's not governance, that's manipulation." Her words rolled deliberately, building weight with each sentence. In the gallery, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries leaned forward, nodding. Beside him, a coalition of progressive and moderate Democrats along with a few silent, stone-faced independents watched with rapt attention. Even to Republican senators, their eyes darting to the cameras and back, gave the faintest, almost imperceptible nods. The presence of quiet agreement from unlikely corners made the moment heavier, charged with the possibility that this wasn't just partisan theater, it was a real fight over the foundation of government credibility. AOC held up a copy of Antoni's past statement calling for the suspension of monthly jobs reports. "This is not about efficiency. This is about control," she said, letting the document fall flat onto the table with a sound that seemed to echo in the wood-paneled room. "Control over what information reaches the public, control over when it reaches them, and control over how it's framed. Once you own the timing, you own the story. Once you own the story, you own the people." A ripple of murmurs moved through the press gallery. Camera operators traded quick nods. They could feel the footage tightening into something explosive. AOC's voice rose, not in volume, but in conviction. "The American people aren't pawns. Their livelihoods, their futures, should not be bargaining chips in a political game. Every time a worker checks that monthly report, they're making decisions whether to take a second job, whether to buy a home, whether to expand their small business. You tamper with that, and you tamper with the heartbeat of the country." Jasmine Crockett watched from her seat, the corners of her mouth tightening not with anger now, but with the rare relief of knowing she wasn't alone in the line of fire. The two women locked eyes for just a second, a look that said we fight together or we don't fight at all. And as AOC leaned in for her final line, the chamber seemed to shrink around her words. "If you can't win with the truth, you have no business winning at all." The silence that followed wasn't passive, it was charged, restless, a question hanging in the air. Was anyone in this room brave enough to stand on that same ground? The air had barely settled from AOC's last words when Senator Mark Whitlow, a staunch Trump ally from Texas, leaned forward and seized the microphone. His voice was clipped, his drawl sharpened into something almost accusatory. "What we're witnessing here," he began, "isn't a defense of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's a political ambush dressed up as righteous outrage." He swept his gaze across the Democratic side of the dais, lingering on Crockett. "Let's be clear, this is about denying a qualified nominee because he's associated with the wrong president." Senator Karen Ellison of Missouri followed, her tone even colder. "The American people are tired of witch hunts. They're tired of watching this chamber become a stage for partisan grandstanding while the real work of governing gets ignored." She pointed toward the gallery where minority leaders sat, her finger a thinly veiled accusation. "You talk about politicization, yet everything in this room today has been nothing but politics." The tension rippled like a live wire. Democratic senators stiffened, a few exchanged terse glances. From the press gallery came the rapid-fire clatter of camera shutters, each click capturing the invisible fault line splitting the room in two. Jasmine sat motionless, her expression unreadable, but inside she could feel the weight shifting. This was no longer just her crossing swords with Trump, it was the full force of his political machinery closing ranks, ready to grind her down under accusations of partisanship. Whitlow leaned in again, sensing momentum. Antony didn't storm the Capitol, he didn't break any laws, but he's being tried here in the court of public opinion because some people don't like his politics. That's not justice, that's vendetta. His words drew low murmurs of assent from the Republican benches, the sound rising just enough to feel like a tide turning against her. Crockett's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her binder, but her mind stayed locked. Asterisk, don't take the bait, asterisk, she told herself. They wanted her to flare, to give them a clip they could twist into proof of Democratic hysteria. Instead, she studied each face on the other side, noting the ones who wouldn't meet her eyes. This wasn't just about Antony, it was about setting a precedent that loyalty to a man could outweigh loyalty to the truth. Ellison's voice cut through again, sharper this time. If the nominee's only crime is being supported by Donald Trump, then say it outright. Don't hide behind moral posturing. The words were a challenge, bait wrapped in decorum. Jasmine inhaled slowly, letting the nose wash over her. In her mind, she saw the faces from the community center back home, the older woman who made her promise to fight, the young man who'd asked if the truth even mattered anymore. This wasn't about her pride, or even her career. It was about whether those people would ever be able to trust the numbers that shaped their lives. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. If you think this is just about politics, she said, looking directly at Whitlow and Ellison, you're not listening to the stakes. This isn't a vendetta, it's a warning. And you better ask yourselves who you're willing to protect when the truth is the casualty. The room went still, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to move first, but no one did. The fight had just widened, and everyone knew the next blow could come from anywhere. Crockett waited for the murmurs from Whitlow and Ellison's defense to fade, then slid a single sheet of paper from her binder. No theatrics. No raised voice, just the precision of someone who knew the weapon she was about to fire didn't need volume to hit hard. I'd like to enter into the record, she began, a statement from Dr. Dave Hebert of the American Institute for Economic Research, a respected conservative economist. She glanced deliberately toward the Republican benches before reading. I've been on several programs with Mr. Antony and have been impressed by two things: his inability to understand basic economics and the speed with which he's gone MAGA. I can only hope the Senate blocks this nomination. The words cut through the air like a wire snapping under tension. For a split second, the room was still. Then came the shifting, the shuffle of papers, the uncomfortable clearing of throats. Even behind Trump, in the row of loyal supporters, a few aides exchanged quick, uneasy glances. The camera operators didn't miss it. Lenses panned in on every flicker of movement, every micro-expression betraying the cracks in the wall of unity Trump had been trying to project. Trump's smirk was gone. He leaned forward, elbows planted firmly on the table, fingers steepled so tightly his knuckles whitened. Let me guess, he said, voice clipped. You dig up one outlier who's bitter and suddenly, that's the consensus. I have hundreds of economists who support Antony. His tone was sharp, defensive, the cadence of a man forced onto the back foot. Crockett's eyes didn't leave his. This isn't an outlier, Mr. Trump. This is your own ideological neighbor looking you in the eye and saying, this man is not fit. You talk about unity. Well, unity isn't real if it only exists in the echo chamber. And when respected voices from your side of the aisle are sounding the alarm, the rest of us would be negligent not to listen. The chair's gavel struck once for quiet as the volume in the chamber began to rise. Reporters were already pushing tweets and headlines into the ether. GOP economists lands Trump pick in live hearing. On cable news, producers would be circling the clip, prepping it for primetime replay before the hearing even adjourned. Trump's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed into slits. I don't take lectures from people who've been lying to the American people for years. And I sure as hell won't let one so-called conservative with an axe to grind decide who serves in my administration. His voice was louder now, the edges fraying. Behind him, a senior aide shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor. Crockett leaned in just enough for her next words to land with deliberate weight. No, Mr. Trump, you don't have to listen to me. You don't even have to listen to Democrats. But when even your own side starts questioning you, how long can denial hold? The silence that followed was thick, not empty, an unspoken acknowledgement that the question wasn't just aimed at Trump, it was aimed at everyone still pretending they didn't already know the answer. Crockett's eyes didn't just see Trump across the table, they saw a courtroom years ago, the paint on the walls peeling, the air heavy with that unique blend of sweat and stale paper. She was fresh out of law school then, barely making rent, a public defender drowning in cases no one wanted to touch. One of them was a young man accused of armed robbery, facing 20 years. The police report was neat, almost too neat, but buried in the discovery was a single line of data, an ATM log showing the stolen card had been used across town at the same moment the boy was already in custody. That number, that timestamp, had been overlooked by everyone, until she saw it. It was the truth, hidden in plain sight, and it saved his life. She remembered standing in that courtroom, heart pounding, watching the prosecutor's face tighten as she read the timestamp aloud. The jury didn't look at her, they looked at the clock on the evidence screen, and they knew. The verdict came back not guilty, but what stayed with her wasn't the win, it was the realization that without that one unaltered piece of data, the truth would have been buried under a story crafted to convict, and the system wouldn't have flinched. Now, years later, in the Senate chamber, she felt the same pulse of urgency in her veins. Data isn't just numbers, she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. It's the proof that keeps innocent people free, that holds the powerful accountable, that stops the wrong story from becoming the only story. Take that away, distort it, delay it, and you're not just playing politics, you're playing with people's lives. Her gaze swept the room, past the senators and cameras, into the imagined faces of those who would never set foot here but would feel the ripples of every decision made inside these walls. Trump sat back, arms folded, but she didn't break stride. I've seen what happens when the truth gets rewritten to fit someone's agenda. It's not theory, to me it's memory. It's the memory of watching someone's mother collapse in relief because a number proved her son's innocence. It's the memory of a man walking free because the data spoke louder than the accusations. For a moment, the chamber seemed quieter, the air denser, as if the weight of her words pressed against the marble columns themselves. So no, Mr. Trump, this isn't about party lines or political wins. This is about whether the truth will still be here when the people need it most. And I promise you, if you think I'll stand by while you hand the keys to our facts to someone who sees them as optional, you're mistaken. She let the silence hold for a beat, then added, because when you've lived the cost of a lie, you don't just fight for the truth, you fight like hell to keep it from being sold. The tension snapped like a cable under strain. Trump's palm came down hard on the table, the sound ricocheting off the chamber walls with a crack that silenced even the rustle of reporters' notepads. I decide who runs my administration, he thundered, his voice carrying the weight of command and the sting of a personal challenge. His eyes locked on Crockett's, daring her to flinch, to blink, to retreat. She didn't move, not a blink, not a breath wasted. When she spoke, her words were measured but laced with steel. And the people decide if that's abuse of power. The sentence hit the air like a detonation, clean, sharp, impossible to walk back. Gasps rippled through the gallery, the kind that come when a punch lands harder than anyone expected. The pen of a Washington Post reporter scratched so fast it tore the paper. A camera operator whispered to a colleague, "That's the clip," without taking his lens off her. On social media, the moment was already breaking free of the chamber. Captions stamped over grainy live screenshots. Crockett to Trump, abuse of power starts here. Trump leaned in, his voice now low but venomous. That's your problem, you think you're here to judge me. You're here because you lost the election, and now you're looking for scraps of relevance. The words were designed to wound, to paint her as small against the gravity of his authority. Crockett didn't so much as twitch. "No, Mr. Trump," she said, letting the quiet sharpen her syllables. "I'm here because millions of people can't walk into this room and tell you that your decisions shaped their survival. I'm here because power in the wrong hands doesn't just mislead, it destroys. And because whether you like it or not, this chamber doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them." She gestured toward the cameras, toward the unseen millions watching from living rooms, office break rooms, and hospital waiting areas. The chair's gavel came down twice, a futile attempt to bring the room back to procedural order. But the energy had shifted, the air crackled, and even the senators, who had spent the morning on autopilot, now sat straighter, their eyes locked on the collision unfolding before them. Trump opened his mouth, but Crockett spoke first, her voice suddenly dropping into something colder, more deliberate. You think this is about your administration. It's not. It's about the country you claim to serve. And here's the truth you can't table slam away. In America, the power is only ever on loan. Abuse it, and it gets taken back whether you see it coming or not. She let the silence after those words stretch just long enough for everyone to feel it settle into their skin. The message wasn't just for Trump. It was for anyone in that chamber thinking they were immune to the reckoning that comes when the public decides enough is enough. Crockett let the tension from Trump's outburst hang in the air a moment longer. Then she shifted her shoulders, squaring not toward him, but toward the semicircle of senators seated around the chamber. Her voice lost none of its force, but the edges softened into something deliberate, meant for those who hadn't yet made up their minds. "Colleagues," she began, the word carrying a weight that pulled every eye to her. "This hearing is not just about one nominee. It's about the legacy of the institutions we swore to protect. And every vote you cast here will live far beyond the news cycle. It will live in the history books your children and mine will read." The gallery stilled. Trump's gaze stayed fixed on her, but she didn't return it. She was looking at Senator Daniels, who had been silent all day, and at Senator Ruiz, who had scribbled furiously through both sides' arguments without betraying a hint of where she stood. "I know some of you are wrestling with the politics of this," Crockett continued, "but I want you to think about the institution itself. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, an agency that belongs to the American people, not to the White House, not to a party, and certainly not to any one man. Its integrity has been built over decades, defended by Democrats and Republicans alike, because we all understood one thing: once you corrupt the data, you corrupt the decisions that keep this country alive." Her words moved like a slow current, steady and relentless. When a small business owner in your state looks at the jobs report, they decide whether to hire another worker or close their doors. When a family reads about wage growth, they decide whether to take out a mortgage or keep renting. These choices are not abstract, they are the lifeblood of every community we represent. And if those choices are made in the dark because the truth has been delayed or distorted, then we have failed them. Trump shifted in his seat, his irritation plain, but now even some of his allies behind him were avoiding her gaze. The cameras caught at little flickers of unease, the kind that could see doubt in the most disciplined ranks. Crockett pressed on. "You have a duty not to me, not to Mr. Trump, not even to your party, but to the people who trusted you with the power to guard their democracy. A duty to ensure that truth in this country is not for sale, not for lease, and not subject to the whims of political loyalty." She finally let her eyes sweep the room, landing on each undecided senator as if marking them one by one. "So ask yourselves this, before you cast your vote: what's worth more, one man's loyalty or a nation's trust?" The question didn't just hang in the air, it stayed there, settling into the silence like a verdict that had yet to be read, demanding an answer no one could dodge forever. Trump leaned forward again, seizing the microphone with the confidence of a man convinced his word alone could close the argument. "Ejay Tani will clean up the Bureau of Labor Statistics," he declared, his tone pitched for the cameras as much as for the room. "We've had years of doctored numbers, politically massaged reports, and an agency more loyal to narratives than to facts. He's the one who will finally bring honesty back." His gaze swept the Republican benches, a silent reminder to his allies that this was the party line. Crockett didn't flinch. She waited just long enough for the echo of his words to fade, then straightened in her chair and spoke with deliberate calm. "Mr. Trump, history is filled with moments when the integrity of our data didn't just matter, it saved us from catastrophe. In 1933, when the Great Depression had gutted the economy, the release of accurate unemployment figures forced Congress to act decisively, creating programs that put millions back to work. If those numbers had been hidden or falsified to make things look better, relief would have come too late, and the suffering would have deepened." She reached for a folder and slid a document into view. In the early 1980s, when inflation spiked into double digits, the raw, unaltered consumer price index made it clear drastic action was necessary. The Federal Reserve took painful steps that were unpopular at the time, but because the data was honest, it restored credibility and stabilized the dollar. People trusted the sacrifices because they trusted the numbers. The chamber was silent except for the sound of her turning the next page. Or take 2008, The housing market collapsed, banks teetered, and panic was everywhere. Accurate job loss reports millions of jobs gone in months forced by partisan emergency measures. Without that unfiltered data, we might have faced a full economic depression instead of a recession. The public hated the bailouts, but the numbers made it impossible for leaders to pretend the crisis didn't exist. She looked directly at him now. In each of those moments, the truth in our economic data wasn't convenient. It wasn't pretty, but it was the only thing that gave this country a fighting chance. You call what we have now dirty numbers, I call them the baseline of democracy. Change them, delay them, filter them, and you take away the one instrument that tells us if the ship is sinking or safe to sail. Trump's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The stillness in the room was almost unnatural, broken only by the scratch of pens in the press gallery. Crockett leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a register that made even the senators in the back row focus. So I'll ask you, Mr. Trump, when the next crisis comes, do you want a bureau that serves the truth or one that serves you? Because history shows we can survive bad news, but we don't survive lies. Trump leaned forward, his hands gripping the table as though he could crush it into splinters. His voice, thick with contempt, boomed across the chamber. You love chaos, Congresswoman, you feed on it. Without division, without outrage, you'd be nothing, just another politician begging for relevance while the country burns. The jab wasn't just political, it was personal. A dagger aimed at her credibility, her very identity. Gasps slipped through the gallery. A few senators raised their eyebrows, while others smirked as if savoring the spectacle. The camera zoomed in, catching every twitch in Trump's jaw, every flicker in Jasmine's eyes. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. She let his words hang in the air, the silence turning into a pressure that pressed against every chest in the room. Trump shifted in his seat, clearly expecting her to lash back immediately, but she didn't. She waited. The pause was surgical, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low but carried like steel on glass. Chaos, she said, her gaze locked on him, is what happens when leaders fear the truth, when they hide it, twist it, bury it under layers of spin, until no one remembers what's real anymore. The sentence sliced through the tension like a scalpel, every syllable deliberate, cutting deeper than volume ever could. She leaned forward now, closing the space between them. I've seen chaos not in these marble halls, but in homes where parents can't feed their kids because someone doctored the numbers. In courtrooms where bad data condemned the innocent. In hospitals where budgets were gutted because the truth was inconvenient. That's the chaos you're flirting with. A rustle moved through the chamber, staffers exchanging glances, a photographer's shutter clicking twice. Hard. Trump didn't respond immediately, his mouth tightened, his fingers tapping a staccato rhythm against the wood. The moment stretched, and for the first time all morning, it wasn't him commanding the room, it was her. Crockett's eyes swept over the senators, her voice steady but sharpened with purpose. The truth isn't your enemy, Mr. Trump, but when leaders treat it like one, the damage doesn't stop here, it spreads, it infects everything. The room was dead still, even the hum of the air vents seemed to fade. She sat back, her final words lingering like the aftershock of an explosion. You say I love chaos, I say you fear the truth. And when fear dictates power, history always remembers the cost. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly from her chair, the weight of the moment pressing against her shoulders, but straightening her spine all the same. The air in the Senate chamber was thick, electrifying, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She didn't look at her notes, didn't need to. Her eyes swept across the days, over the senators who had shifted uncomfortably under her gaze all morning, and then straight into the cameras. This was no longer just about E.J. Antoni's nomination. This was about the spine of a democracy. When the truth becomes negotiable, she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of fire. It's not just data that gets rewritten. It's lives, it's rights, it's the future my constituents and your constituents are counting on. Her hand tightened around the edge of the podium, knuckles whitening. You can't protect minority rights if you're willing to erase the numbers that prove injustice exists. You can't guard the economy if you allow those in power to hide the signs of collapse. And you cannot, she leaned forward, driving the point like a hammer blow, pretend to serve the people while serving only the man who sits in the highest office. Across the room, Trump shifted in his seat, his jaw set ice hard, but he didn't interrupt, Not now. Not with every camera trained on her and every word aimed at the heart of the matter. Crockett's tone softened but lost none of its force. I'm here for those who have been told their struggles don't count because the data says otherwise. For the single mother whose paycheck disappears before the month is over. For the small business owner watching the cost of goods climb, while the official reports whisper at everything's fine. For every American who believes the truth should be bigger than politics. Her voice rose again, echoing off the marble. If we confirm a man who stood among those who sought to overturn our democracy, who called for hiding the numbers that keep our government accountable, then we are saying loud and clear that loyalty to one man outweighs loyalty to the people. I refuse to be complicit in that betrayal. The gallery erupted in a low hum of approval. A few minority leaders nodded, their faces a mix of pride and urgency. The chair's gavel came down sharply. This hearing is adjourned. Chairs scraped against the floor. Papers shuffled, but Trump was already on his feet, striding toward the exit with clipped steps, his entourage close behind. The cameras followed him, but the room's eyes stayed on her. Crockett gathered her papers, then paused, looking straight into the lens for the last time that day. Her final words cut through the din like a bell. The nomination now heads to the Senate floor. But the real verdict, she gestured subtly toward the public gallery and, beyond it, the millions watching at home, is in your hands. And history will remember which side you chose. Within hours of the gavel's final strike, the hearing was no longer confined to the marble and velvet of the Senate chamber. It had detonated across the nation's airwaves. Every major network rolled split-screen coverage, Jasmine Crockett's fiery cross-examination on one side, Trump's tightening jaw and clipped retorts on the other. Cable anchors spoke over looping footage, pausing mid-sentence to replay her line. Chaos is what happens when leaders fear the truth, like it was a slow-motion knockout in a championship fight. On social media, the battle metastasized into a digital street war. Hashtags like #truth or treason, #stand with Crockett, and #protect the numbers climbed into the global top 10. Conservative pundits blasted her as grandstanding for the radical left, while progressive voices called her the firewall between democracy and decay. TikTok edits set her sharpest moments to pounding bass drops. Instagram Reels slowed Trump's table slam into a cinematic echo, replayed millions of times in less than a day. Pollsters scrambled to capture the aftershock. Overnight surveys revealed a chasm. 71% of Democrats said on Tony's nomination should be withdrawn immediately, while 64% of Republicans insisted the hearing was a partisan hit job. Independents fractured. Restless told reporters they were still processing, their faith in government data now hanging by a frayed thread. Editorial pages split like tectonic plates. The New York Times hailed Crockett's performance as a masterclass in holding power to account, while the Wall Street Journal warned she had set a dangerous precedent by politicizing economic stewardship. Talk radio lit up with callers arguing over whether the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a neutral guardian of truth or a weapon for whichever party held the pen. In living rooms, diners, and factory break rooms, Americans debated with the same urgency usually reserved for war or scandal. Teachers whispered about it in school hallways. Wall Street analysts dissected her economic arguments on investor calls. But it was the clip 34 seconds of pure, unbroken confrontation that kept the nation hooked. A camera had caught the moment Trump leaned in, eyes locked on Crockett, and she refused to flinch. That defiance, magnified on screens from Maine to California, became the story's beating heart. By the time the sun rose the next morning, it was no longer just a nomination fight. It was a litmus test of truth, of loyalty, of the very idea that numbers could be trusted at all. And as the headline screamed, one question loomed over every feed, every coffee counter, every whispered conversation: when the truth is on trial, which side will America choose? That evening, Jasmine Crockett stepped off the plane and into the humid embrace of her hometown. The Senate's marble halls were behind her now, replaced by the hum of ceiling fans and the smell of collard greens drifting from the kitchen of the East Side Community Center. Word had spread by text chains, church announcements, and viral clips that she was coming home, and the folding chairs were already full. She didn't take the podium right away. Instead, she moved through the crowd, shaking hands, clasping shoulders, locking eyes like each person carried a piece of the truth she'd fought for in Washington. A grandmother in a Sunday hat pressed a faded grocery receipt into her hand. On the back, a scrawled note, "Keep fighting. We see you." Jasmine folded it into her jacket like a talisman. At the front row, a circle of young activists waited, their hoodies still damp from marching in the rain the week before. One girl, no older than 16, spoke first, her voice unsteady but fierce. "When you said, in that chamber, chaos is what happens when leaders fear the truth, it made me feel like I could speak up too." A boy beside her, clutching a worn civics textbook, added, "We're registering voters this weekend. All of us, because if they're scared of our voices, then we're doing something right." Jasmine listened, letting their words wash over her like a second wind. She told them about the pressure in that hearing room, the weight of knowing the country was watching, and how the fight wasn't hers alone, it belonged to every person who refused to be blinded by spin and power. The applause that followed wasn't the polite ripple of politics, it was raw, urgent, alive. By the time she left, the night air was heavy with summer heat, but her stride was lighter. Behind her, the community center's lights burned late, young voices spilling out into the street, and somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just about a Senate vote anymore, it was about what an awakened public could do when they decided the truth was worth defending. The screen floods with motion, a rapid-fire montage of front-page headlines, each one stamped with words that seemed to vibrate with urgency. Crockett confronts Trump over data integrity. Senate hearing erupts in chaos. Truth on trial. Social media clips roll in tight succession. Jasmine's sharp rebuttal, the gavel slamming for order, a freeze frame of Trump's tightened jaw. Tweets flash across the screen, hashtags pulsing, hashtag truth over power, hashtag stand with Crockett, hashtag data matters. In a dimly lit room, Jasmine sits alone at her desk, a leather-bound journal open before her. Her pen moves in deliberate strokes, each word a quiet counterpoint to the noise outside. Her voice comes in over the images, low and steady, carrying the weight of what she's seen. Democracy isn't defended in speeches, it's defended in the choices we make when the truth is at stake. The scene shifts, voters stepping into booths, students holding clipboards on street corners, hands dropping envelopes into ballot boxes. We see a mother explaining the news to her child, a veteran placing a flag outside his home, a small town council chamber packed with citizens demanding answers. Jasmine's voice sharpens, the tone less reflective now and more like a challenge. It's not the power in Washington that decides the future, it's the power in your hands. The music swells, a deep, resonant hum that builds until it feels like it's pressing against the edges of the frame. Jasmine looks up from her journal, eyes catching the light, and the camera holds on that gaze just long enough for the silence to feel electric. Her final words drop into the quiet like a stone into still water. History doesn't wait for permission, and neither should you. Black screen, white text fades in, stark and unblinking. What choice will you make? In the end, this story isn't just about a clash in the Senate. It's about the constant, quiet battles we each face when truth is on the line. It's a reminder that silence is a choice, and so is action. Integrity isn't preserved by those in power alone. It's safeguarded by ordinary people who refuse to look away, even when it's easier. The courage to speak, to question, to stand, that's what keeps a democracy alive. So ask yourself, when the moment comes to defend what's right, will you be a bystander or a defender? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.